Emma carefully lifted the last box from the trunk of her old sedan, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the quiet street lined with manicured lawns and pristine homes. Her new bungalow sat modestly amongst the sprawling, polished houses of the upscale neighborhood, its faded paint and chipped steps telling stories of years gone by. Emma's fingers trembled slightly from the effort and nerves, but she welcomed the challenge. This move was her fresh start, a chance to build a peaceful life far from the constant noise and judgment she'd known before. As she carried the box toward the porch, the distant sound of laughter and clinking glasses drew her gaze to the elegant garden next door. Veronica, the neighborhood association president, was hosting one of her famous parties. Veronica was all smiles, impeccably dressed, surrounded by neighbors who bent over backwards to keep their pristine reputations intact. To Emma, they looked like a world she didn't yet belong to, gleaming faces sharpened with old wealth and cold pride. Emma caught Veronica's sharp glance as she stepped onto the lawn, noting the subtle tightening of the woman's jaw. Veronica whispered something to her friend nearby and then made her way over. "Excuse me," Veronica said in a voice that was both sweet and slicing, "I couldn't help but notice all these dusty boxes scattered about. You do realize this is a rather refined neighborhood, don't you? Perhaps you should reconsider if this is the right place for someone like you." Emma's stomach clenched, but she met Veronica's gaze steadily. "I'm here to stay," she replied quietly. The air grew taut between them, charged with unspoken challenges, before Veronica turned sharply and walked back toward her guests. Emma stood alone amid the boxes, a simple woman planted in a world that hadn't yet welcomed her. Veronica's words echoed in Emma's mind long after the woman disappeared back into the circle of glittering guests. The garden party continued, alive with laughter and the occasional clink of fine china, but Emma felt a prickling heat rise to her cheeks that no amount of warm sunlight could dispel. She set the box down gently on the porch step and took a deep breath, reminding herself that this neighborhood was supposed to be her new beginning, not a battleground. Yet, as the minutes passed, the subtle hostility around her became all too apparent. From the corner of her eye, Emma noticed groups of neighbors changing their conversation as they glanced her way, their voices dipping into hushed tones. She caught snatches of commentary, words like out of place, shabby, and why would anyone like her live here, floated in the spring air. It was clear they had already drawn their conclusions about the newcomer with her simple clothes and dusty boxes. Emma's heart sank, but she refused to let their judgment dictate her mood. Then came the quiet but unmistakable shift. From behind a hedge, Mrs. Langley, a woman known for her sharp tongue and fierce loyalty to Veronica, peered openly at Emma with a smirk. She gestured for a few others to join her, and before Emma fully grasped what was happening, a small crowd had formed opposite her lawn, some leaning lazily against their costly cars, others with arms crossed and lips curled in disdain. Their sidelong glances felt like knives stabbing through her resolve. Emma busied herself by unpacking an old, battered suitcase, hoping to remain invisible, hoping the day would end without incident. But then Veronica reappeared. She was dressed impeccably, as always, but today her posture carried a hint of calculated intimidation. She crossed the freshly mowed grass with deliberate steps and stopped in front of Emma, folding her arms. "Well," Veronica began, voice dripping with faux concern, "if you're going to make a home here, maybe you should at least put some effort into appearances. This neighborhood is about presentation, darling. Don't take it personally, but your look and your belongings are hardly the standard we uphold." Emma's hands clenched involuntarily around the suitcase handle. She swallowed hard, fighting back the sting of humiliation, the familiar surge of frustration that had accompanied every moment people underestimated her before. "I'm not here for appearances," she said quietly, "I'm here to live. And these," she tapped the suitcase, "hold things important to me." Veronica gave a practiced, condescending smile, glancing briefly to the small gathering of neighbors who had joined her. "Important, perhaps, but hardly impressive. You must understand, Emma, that this street thrives on excellence, on success that's visible and sparkling. Your items don't match that at all. Murmurs of agreement bubbled from the crowd, some chuckling softly. Emma lowered her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth in her cheeks intensify. She didn't want to fight here, didn't want to cause a scene. Yet, every word Veronica spoke poured gasoline over old wounds, reigniting a desire to prove she was more than the sum of others' opinions. One of the younger neighbors, a man named Greg, snickered loudly. Yeah, it's like she walked into the wrong party. Hope she's not planning to turn this street into a flea market. Laughter rippled through the onlookers, surprising Emma with its harshness. Emotion welled up inside her, equal parts shame and determination. She stepped back toward her door, folding her arms as if to protect herself. The facade of calm she had tried so hard to maintain wavered dangerously. At that moment, Mrs. Langley approached from the crowd. Her voice was sharp, the kind that could slice through silence without effort. Honestly, Emma, why do you insist on being out of place? This neighborhood isn't made for people who think they can just show up like you do. If you cared about fitting in, you'd know how to act. Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. The familiar burn in her throat reminded her of 1,000 encounters like this. Times when stereotyping and prejudice had tried to write her story before she could tell it herself. Suddenly, a soft voice interrupted the taunts. It was Mrs. Patel, a kind woman Emma had noticed watching from a distance. Leave her be, Mrs. Patel said firmly, stepping closer. Everyone deserves respect. We don't know her story. Veronica's eyes flickered with annoyance at being challenged. This isn't about personal stories, it's about community standards, she replied coolly. Standards that keep this neighborhood desirable. Emma glanced gratefully at Mrs. Patel but knew the battle was far from over. The crowd's whispers resumed, and the laughter resumed, only softer this time, but no less pointed. When Veronica finally left, the snide remarks did not. People whispered openly about Emma's simple life, about how she must have come from somewhere undesirable or lacked the means to live properly. Emma could feel their stares weighing heavily on her, their judgments slicing invisibly through the spaces between words. That evening, after the party had dwindled, Emma closed her front door carefully, closing out the laughter and cold glances like the sting of sharp wind. She sank into an old armchair that had once been her mother's, her fingers brushing over a wooden frame as she dialed her best friend, Laura. Laura, Emma whispered, it's worse than I thought. They're making it clear I'm not welcome here. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the exhaustion she fought to hide. Laura's reassuring voice flowed through the receiver. Emma, you've got to stand strong. They don't know who you are. Let them see what you can do when the time comes. Emma nodded even though Laura couldn't see her, wiping a tear before it could fall. I didn't come all this way to let them push me out. The next morning brought no relief. Emma noticed a flurry of messages on the neighborhood's social media page, comments from Veronica herself, peppered with subtle digs about Emma's questionable taste and lack of decorum. The posts were thinly veiled attempts to rally more neighbors against Emma's presence. Once more at her door, Emma found herself under the watchful eyes of neighbors who had begun lingering near her property, whispering under breath, making no effort to hide their judgments. One even photographed her fragile garden gnomes for what Emma imagined was some sarcastic, shared joke. Veronica's influence seemed to grow with each passing hour, tightening the invisible noose around Emma's attempt to belong. In a moment of quiet desperation, Emma allowed herself a brief thought, maybe she should just leave. Maybe this neighborhood would never accept her. But as her fingers traced worn edges of an old photograph she'd pulled from one of the new boxes, a reminder sparked within her, a strength forged through battles faced alone. She would not be erased quietly. Not this time. The thought came unbidden, almost defiantly, they want to humiliate me. They want to see me broken in my own yard. But I'm not giving them that satisfaction. The sun climbed higher, its golden light cutting across the fragile shadows of doubt. Emma squared her shoulders and headed back outside, knowing that whatever happened next, she wouldn't back down. And from the hushed murmurs gathering just beyond the fence, it was clear, today, the neighborhood's struggle for control would reach a new, inevitable peak. What would you do if you were in Emma's shoes? Would you fight to prove your worth, or quietly accept you don't belong? The day of the neighborhood garage sale arrived like a storm on the horizon, carrying with it an undercurrent of tension that made Emma's chest tighten. Veronica had made it clear this event would be the true test, a public demonstration of who belonged and who was merely tolerated. Emma stood in her modest front yard, the boxes she'd been accused of hoarding arranged neatly behind her, their contents yet a mystery to the gathering crowd. Neighbors strolled slowly down the street, their eyes flicking with varying degrees of curiosity, judgment, and barely concealed amusement. Veronica was the first to approach, impeccably dressed and holding a glass of crisp white wine, her smile a practiced mask of superiority. "Well, Emma, let's see what treasures you call important," she said, voice laden with condescension. Emma met the crowd's gaze steadily, refusing to let their expectations weigh her down. She took a deep breath and began opening one of the larger boxes, careful to reveal the contents in a way that invited curiosity, not dismissal. Inside lay a collection of meticulously restored vintage car models, each a miniature masterpiece glinting under the morning sun. Alongside them were carefully preserved photographs of gleaming automobiles, their owners proudly smiling from decades past. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Oh, look at that," murmured Mrs. Patel, stepping closer. "Those are exquisite." "The craftsmanship," Greg muttered, his earlier sneer replaced by astonishment. As Emma continued unpacking, a low rumble of engines drew everyone's attention down the street. One by one, pristine vintage cars began rolling into view, polished to a mirror shine, their engines purring softly, a parade of automotive history that none present could have anticipated. The crowd's disbelief was palpable. Here came a classic cherry red Mustang, followed by a sleek, deep green Jaguar, then a gleaming black Cadillac with polished chrome that sparkled in the sun. The cars pulled up along Emma's curb, their presence commanding attention and admiration. Veronica's confident posture faltered as she watched, lips pressed into a tight line. Her eyes darted between the crowd, now buzzing with excitement, and Emma, who stood near her yard with a quiet but undeniable pride. "It's impressive," Greg admitted, his tone grudging. Emma took a cautious step forward and began sharing stories about the vehicles, the painstaking hours spent restoring each piece, the histories behind them, the rare techniques she'd used to bring life back to these rolling works of art. Her voice carried the passion and knowledge that came from lifelong dedication, a hidden world behind her simple exterior. Faces softened, skepticism giving way to something closer to respect. Neighbors leaned in, asking questions, eager to learn more. Mrs. Langley's sneer vanished into an awkward cough as she listened, her earlier dismissal replaced by a quiet acknowledgement Emma now owned a part of this neighborhood's prestige in a way no one had expected. Veronica, however, remained rigid. Yet as the crowd's admiration swelled, her influence waned, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. One of the guests, an elderly man named Henry, finally broke the quiet. "Emma, this is remarkable work. You've brought something truly special to our community." Emma smiled, warmth breaking through the tension. She glanced at Veronica, who met her gaze briefly, a flicker of something, regret? Surprise, passing through her eyes before she turned away. A few moments later, laughter erupted from the group as neighbors began sharing their own stories of treasured items and pastimes, transformed now by Emma's unexpected arrival. What had started as a day meant to humiliate had evolved into a celebration of passion and skill. Veronica's once commanding presence diminished before the spectacle. Her earlier attempts to belittle Emma now seemed hollow, their sting dulled by the woman's evident expertise and genuine warmth. The neighborhood's dynamic subtly shifted as Emma's vintage car collection became a symbol, proof that beneath a humble facade could lie extraordinary stories waiting to be heard. In this unfolding moment, Emma wasn't just accepted, she was admired. and the whispers of prejudice dissolved under the roar of polished engines and genuine applause. As the last gleam of sunlight reflected off the polished curves of her vintage cars, Emma finally allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The crowd had slowly begun to disperse, many neighbors still lingering near her driveway, inspecting the impeccable restorations with newfound respect. The shift in their demeanor was unmistakable. Curiosity had blossomed into admiration. Emma stepped away from the crowd briefly and leaned against the hood of a deep blue 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, a car with a story as vibrant as its paint job. She felt tired but not defeated. In fact, today marked something more than just acceptance. It was the subtle unveiling of who she truly was, underneath the simple clothes and quiet demeanor. Mrs. Patel approached her again, offering a warm smile. "You know, Emma, I never imagined you led such a fascinating life." Emma chuckled softly, a hint of vulnerability showing in her eyes. "I suppose I come across as more ordinary than I am. I've spent years traveling, restoring these classic cars, not for fame or fortune, but because preserving history has always been my passion." She brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the movement casual but expressive. "In fact," Emma continued, "the bungalow here isn't just a house to me, it's a refuge. After years in bustling cities and high-pressure jobs, I wanted a place to slow down, to focus on what really matters, bringing these beautiful machines back to life, one careful restoration at a time." Her voice softened. "That's also why I dress simply. I don't need flashy clothes to define me. I prefer to let the work speak." The neighbors listened, captivated by her story. They had placed her in a box long before they understood her, and now they realized how profoundly mistaken they had been. "I'm impressed," said Henry, the elderly man from earlier, his eyes bright with respect. "Your dedication is inspiring." Veronica, who had remained on the sidelines throughout this conversation, finally stepped forward. Her usual confident mask seemed less sure as she regarded Emma. I didn't realize," she began carefully. "I judged too quickly, and for that, I apologize." Emma nodded, her expression gracious yet measured. "Thank you, Veronica. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong." The evening air settled softly around them, and as neighbors started to smile and share stories inspired by Emma's history, a quiet warmth took hold of the street. Long-held barriers softened, replaced by a budding sense of community enriched not by appearances, but by genuine connection. Emma found herself reflecting on how far she'd come, from a nervous woman clutching boxes filled with memories to a respected member of this neighborhood, known for her passion and resilience. She realized that the simple presentation she'd once feared would hold her back had instead been her armor, allowing her true self to emerge gradually and authentically. As the last guests said their goodbyes, Emma stood by her driveway, watching the vintage cars lined up like jewels against the quiet street. This was more than a collection, it was a testament to years of patience, skill, and love for a craft that transcended appearances. She understood something crucial: acceptance doesn't arrive through fitting in by other standards, but through unveiling the parts of ourselves we hold dear, and standing firm regardless. The night deepened, tinged with possibility, as Emma locked the door to her bungalow and turned back one last time to the shimmering cars. This was not just her home, it was the start of a new chapter, where respect was earned by heart and dedication, not just by outward appearances. And with that thought, she stepped inside, ready for whatever the future might hold. In the days following the garage sale spectacle, the neighborhood's atmosphere shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. The air, once thick with whispered judgments and sidelong glances, now buzzed with tentative greetings and genuine interest. Emma found herself greeted with smiles during morning walks and invited to join casual gatherings she had never dared to attend before. The vintage cars had opened a door, but it was Emma's grace and quiet confidence that walked through it and claimed new friendships. Veronica, however, faced a different reality. The neighborhood association had convened in the wake of the public display, and the leadership questioned her conduct. Rumors swirled that several neighbors, the very ones who had once echoed her disdain, had voiced their discomfort with her narrow-mindedness and persistent attempts to undermine Emma. The garden party queen who had once ruled social circles found herself increasingly isolated. At the association meeting, Veronica's demeanor was cautious, stripped of its usual bluster. When confronted about her behavior, she offered a hesitant apology. "I realize now I judged too harshly, and I regret causing hurt in our community." Emma, seated among the neighbors who had supported her, nodded graciously but with quiet strength. Her silence spoke volumes. She was not seeking vengeance but understanding and respect. Later, Veronica approached Emma with a small envelope containing a modest compensation and a handwritten note expressing remorse. Emma accepted it without fanfare. It wasn't the money or the note that mattered, it was the acknowledgement of growth, however belated. The transformation rippled beyond formal settings. Children who had once stared curiously but with reservation now played freely between Emma's vintage cars, their laughter a bright, hopeful melody against the hum of polished engines. Neighbors began asking for Emma's advice on restoration projects, eager to tap into her expertise. Invitations found their way to Emma's mailbox, each folded piece of paper a small victory over doubt and exclusion. One afternoon, Emma hosted a neighborhood event unlike any before, a vintage car showcase to raise funds for local charities. The gathering overflowed with laughter, conversation, and shared pride. Neighbors who had once greeted her with skepticism now stood shoulder to shoulder with her, united by admiration and genuine connection. Veronica, although attending reluctantly, maintained a polite distance, her earlier smirks replaced by quiet reflection. The experience changed her, too. Witnessing Emma's strength, passion, and the community's embrace of what she once scorned made Veronica reconsider the walls she had built. After the event, as neighbors dispersed under twinkling street lamps, Emma found herself surrounded by new friends who looked to her with respect and warmth. The neighborhood had become more than a place to live, it was a community transformed by understanding and acceptance. Emma smiled, her heart full. She had not simply moved into a new home, she had woven herself into the fabric of a community, not by conforming, but by being authentically herself. What would you have done in Emma's place? Stood firm in the face of judgment or quietly slipped away? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell.